Okay. Let me tell you, we have come to the most important session of this 2 days deliberation. Other sessions were important, but not so important. And to go back, why this whole exercise? I can remember when I read the first concept note and when it was being discussed with us, there were at least 4 issues which were in mind in terms of convening this meeting. One is that the concerns about environmental degradation, the adverse implication of the climate change, that was the entry point to this whole concept of having this discussion, and how these concerns can be reflected in post-2015 global development framework. So this was one of the areas. The second was, what are the South Asian priorities in this regard? Apart from the general concern for the environmental dimensions and their interface with the development framework, the second was obviously what are the South Asian priorities, and it was recognized from the very beginning. The priorities may also vary across the countries. The third objective of this exercise had been how to relate these concerns and the priorities to the ongoing debate. How do they relate to these things? Are they being already reflected, or there is a lacuna, and how do you do that? And the last but the fourth point was that how to synthesize all these concerns, priorities, and the debates, and then put them as an workable input in order to improve the discussions which are going on in the global debate, and in the process strengthen the voice of the excluded or marginalized, particularly from the global south. So these were basically the 4 issues. If you also recall, the 7 sessions we had, and if you exclude the cafe session, then we had 6 sessions, and this one included will be 7. And how did we move regarding realize these particular 4 objectives? The first was the curtain raising session, you may recall, where we talked about the background of the MDGs and then the process leading up to the 2015 framework. What are the current debates over there? What are the issues which are being discussed? And what are the instruments which are available for implementing those possible candidate indicators, targets, and goals? All these issues were discussed at that in that particular area. Following from the session, the issue which came out very strongly is the growth framework. That MDG did not have a growth framework. How important is a growth framework for capacity building, particularly productive capacity building, and also sustaining the achievements in the human development sector, and social protections, and etc. So growth was an important element of discussion all along. That led us to the second issue. The second issue was, the second session was all about creating growth within planetary boundaries. Now, we refer to that, what exactly is the planetary boundary? This is also a shifting frontier. But the issue was that within the resources we have, we are going to use them sustainably, effectively, and a development-friendly way. And the issue of intergenerational equity was also highlighted. You may remember that. So that was the second dilemma we dealt with, growth within the planetary boundary. I think a logical follow-up of that particular session was the issue of inclusiveness, growth inclusiveness, social inclusiveness, and then, of course, the issue of inequality, deprivation, and marginalization. That was the third session which we discussed, coming logically from there. In between, we had in the late afternoon, the private sector, NGO, and the government perspectives, which we called a reality check. I won't go back on those 3 sorts of coffee we had yesterday. And then we went for the the morning session about the shared society, the governance issue, the politics issue, because at the end of the day, it is all about governance emerging as the fourth pillar of sustainable development, and how it is going to all create a shared society, and the role of various instruments, including the role of right to information and other things, and also the political parties' conducts and others. So that was there. An important session coming out from that, from the first day and also the letter, is that if we want to have sustainability, then technology will play a big role. So how do we access technology, how we do innovation, how do we create a society which is more in technology friendly, and how do you really deal with the global intellectual property right regime within which both the innovators and the consumers will have a balance of interest in certain ways. So that was the technology input, and we singled out technology as one of the major instruments for achieving sustainability, or for pursuing sustainability. I think green growth in particular could be referred to in this way. The last session which we just had took up the issue of instruments in a much more comprehensive way, because technology was one of the areas for instruments for implementation, but in a bigger way. ODA, of course, private sector's role is in way. Then we talked about the climate change issues and their instruments, and of course the ownership issue coming through people's participation in various ways. So ownership and instruments together, move together in the last session, as we say. So colleagues, if you look back, then we really had a good set of sessions. We had fantastic presentation, very energetic discussions, and very good responses, and we never shied away from our comments and bringing out our biases and prejudices in a very unabashed way. So that was the good 6 sessions over there. Now the duty is, at this moment, is to debrief the chairs. What is the debriefing of the chairs means? The debriefing of the chairs means that they are going to tell us through their eyes how, sitting up here, not down there, they have seen how these whole discussions transpired. But they are not going to repeat the discussion. We do not want that. We want the issues which were discussed, the debates which were there, and bring out 3 to 5 maximum major conclusions and recommendations, which can be considered as a part of the synthesis, as I mentioned, as the 4th objective, to be collated together finally into a coherent document. So this is an input for a final outcome document of this 2 days exercise as we move in that way. So there will be these 4 things. Now, regarding my session, which was, I was made the curtain raising presentation, but I see my very venerable, respected chair sitting amongst us. Whether Dr. Kumarasamy would like to highlight
I'm very happy to.
I will soon suffer from identity crisis, being chair of that session and chair of this session too. No, would you like to put in 5 minutes on that?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I am ably aided by Rashni Alias. She has given on behalf of us couple of notes, couple of slides. Let me just summarize them, because you know all of them, most of them. I think one critical issue which was there is that how to create the balance between the SDG scope and the objectives, and the MDG scope and objectives. That was a major issue in that way. So whether the development concerns will get marginalized because of the environmental concerns, and in the process whether we will not be getting adequate environmental substance into post-2015. So that was one of the major issues. So creating the balance between all the pillars of the sustainable development. The issue of the issue of some of the issues which I have just mentioned had been there already. The one of the issues was how to improve the environmental indicators. 2 specific indicators were mentioned. One is the sustainable consumption related indicator and goal that was very strongly emphasized. And the other was the emission of the greenhouse gases, to put it in certain ways. The issue of inequality and overlapping inequalities were mentioned. The relationship, the establishing a coherence amongst the the post-2015 framework and other international covenants which have implications for the post-2015 was referred, and a coherence has to be established. That was also mentioned in many ways. And then we had the data issue, because many of the framework elements which are coming up do not have adequate data at this moment. So what type of investment will be done at what level in terms of generating data and information, which is an instrument of transparency and accountability, not only for monitoring progress. That was also very, very strongly highlighted. And then the issue of the outcomes were highlighted, that whether we can move the emphasis from inputs and outputs, even from access to the outcomes, and how to devise the outcome indicators vis-a-vis the input-output indicators. That was all those issues were there. Basically, there was issues which were, ended up we highlighting that the participation deficit, the capacity deficit, the knowledge asymmetry which we observe in terms of participation of the Southern Voice was also underscored, and it was said that not only through our missions, but also the civil society voice and the voice of the evidence-based policy analysts, that is the researchers, were to be also brought on board on this case, and what Southern Voice is trying to do, as you may know. So those were some of the elements of that. I am pretty sure that I didn't do justice to the rich discussion which was done, but please consider it that you have been remembered. So now I will invite the very first session after the opening, which was chaired by Dr. Asif Memon from SDPI. This was all about economic growth within planetary limits. Natural limits and planetary limits are the same?
Good question. It was within natural limits. That was the title.
Natural means nature.
Yes, but they're interrelated.
Okay. Asif, you have 5 minutes, so 7 minutes max.
Thank you. As discussed earlier, the focus for this session is largely on recommendation. So I'll focus more on just quickly discussing some of the issues that we discussed. I split them into 3 areas. One is there was a certain amount of academic or theoretical discussion about growth, inclusiveness, and green growth, and the discussion largely focused on. We know that the link between economic growth and reduction in poverty, greater inclusiveness has been questioned. There are various studies that highlight that a large number of people around the world have been raised out of what economists consider absolute poverty because of economic growth, but there are lots of questions about how those things are measured and the causality of it. There was also a discussion about whether economic growth leads to environmental degradation, and the academy is largely in agreement that in many places it does. The question is how that can be reduced over time whilst maintaining the fruits of economic growth in an inclusive and equitable way. And finally, and this came through quite strongly from one of the speakers, Dr. Gunawardana's presentation, which was all increases in economic growth don't necessarily mean that those things are good for society. The example that she used, which was a very good example, was increases in health expenditure, which are directly an outcome of worsening of the environment because of economic activity. The way we measure the economy today, that counts as an increase in economic growth. Moving forward, what we've done is split the discussions into 2 areas. One is for consumers and producers, and the other from a policy-focused perspective. There was, as discussed by Dr. Bhattacharya for the first session as well, there was a lot of conversation about sustainable consumption. The question then, as raised by many people, is does that then reduce economic growth, or does that reduce welfare? What do we mean by sustainable growth? Sustainable consumption, sorry. Does that mean a reduction in consumption? and what would be the economic fallouts of that with regards to employment or income of households at the lower end of the household income spectrum. We've already seen in wealthy countries, and this trend is also occurring in other countries, emerging market countries, where incomes are going up, which is consumer demands, consumer preferences, and consumer tastes change towards more sustainable products and services. Although there have been some criticisms of this as well, and we can discuss that at some other point. From our discussion regarding the corporate sector, here we're talking about the producers. There was discussions about environmental record keeping, that needs to improve, and so that we can actually measure the impact of producers. This is important when we come to the recommendation of the polluter pays concept. And then overcoming constraints. This came through from the presentation on the hotel sector yesterday, that there are lots of producers who perceive that the cost of making their accounting or their products or their processes more green, they perceive that those costs would be higher than the benefits from those. So an exploration of that might be necessary. They also perceive that they may not have the funds or the finance or the capital available in order to make their businesses different, in order to affect that kind of change in their businesses. And also in smaller firms, firms that are not part of international chains, there is a lack of technical know-how regarding this. With regards to the policy focus, there was a lot of discussion about governance issues, and specifically in South Asia, that was one of the things highlighted as a challenge with regards to accountability and transparency. But also the need for incorporating environment in the long-term policy focus of our states. And one issue raised by one of the questioners was how global treaties reduce the national policy space, and whether there's a tension there, and whether we can try and figure out a way around that. I don't have a lot of time left. I'll quickly come to the recommendations, and we've basically split that into two parts. The first part, I think, is more important. The second part are just examples of instruments that can be used. The first part is about guiding principles, and principles that should permeate through thinking about policy, whether that is corporate policy or whether that is state policy. The concept of the triple bottom line, which in my opinion is an analogy of, which is a corporate concept, but is an analogy of the sustainable growth concept. The analogous part of profit margins would be economic growth, and of social concerns would be various social development indicators, and of carbon footprints and other environmental impacts would be concerns about environmental policy and climate change. The question was raised about growth within planetary boundary, and I've put 3 question marks. Could have put more or less, but the question is, what do we mean by that? What do we mean by planetary boundary? How do we measure that? How is it captured? I don't think there's any disagreement that there should be economic growth beyond any ecological limits, but how do we measure those? And there's a lot of room for confusion, debate, arguments in that. Move towards sustainable consumption and sustainable production. I have to admit once again my own ignorance here. I understand the concept of sustainable production. I think it's possible using green accounting techniques to measure the unsustainable impacts of production. I'm not sure I understand sustainable consumption quite as well. While it is possible to measure some consumption's unsustainable impact, what do we mean? Are we going to force consumers not to buy things? Is that what we mean by that? And how would that translate into policy decisions? Instruments can be incentivizing sustainable production through taxes and subsidies, the introduction of green accounting, both in the way corporations account for profits and losses and expenses, but also the way we as economists measure the economy. I think we need to incorporate prices of natural resources. We need to incorporate depreciation of natural resources in our calculations, and there's a room for a lot of discussion about how to do that. The current mechanism of GDP counting is obviously not satisfactory. The need for public-private partnerships, and other recommendations like polluter pays, and also something that Pri mentioned yesterday, which has been used since a few times in a number of sessions, the concept of global commons. And I'll leave it at that with just one last thing. Recently, there's been talk of, everybody knows that a lot of countries have what are called national parks, areas where wildlife is left alone and oftentimes used for tourism as well. Recently, there's been a chat to develop the largest national park in 3 islands, I believe somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And it's been used as in the same context of the global commons, as in this is a space for the world's people and obviously the environment and non-humans, as mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Memon, for that very structured debrief, both in terms of principles and instruments and the debates which we had. I move on to the next session. The next session on inequality or equality and sustainability will be presented by a person no less than the Executive Director of CEPA, Priyanti. But may I draw the attention of the ladies sitting at the end who are supposed to show time? Please do that, because you are anyway, you will be the most unpopular people after this exercise, because you are showing times to very important people over here. She did. Please carry on. Anyway, your destiny is sealed, but please show that. Don't forget to show that. Thank you. Priyanti, please.
Okay.
You also have 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, I'm not taking anything. Okay, the issues about equity and sustainability, I'm not actually going to go through the challenges and issues. I think we've talked about them extensively. So I'd go, as I recommended, straight into the recommendations that need to feed into the MDG discussions. Right? We looked at them in terms of guiding principles, goals perhaps to be included, and some instruments. Very much the structure has been given to us by the team, the organizing team, so we stuck to that. One of there were like 4 guiding principles: bringing back a strong rights-based approach to development. We thought that this wasn't actually talked about, but we thought about the whole conversation about growth was not that we were going to throw growth out, as seems to be implied at some points, but that there needs to be some kind of just growth that addresses poverty and inequality, and as was said in the previous session, ecological limits, not growth for the sake of wealth creation for some. So that was really the message that came from that session. We need to link, and I think this came out before, after that as well, link the global framework, and that's a challenge, with the national. And there was some talk in our session about building on homegrown models, like the community forestry. So not just to ignore the fact that there are some homegrown models. And of course, then the issue which has been talked about right through these sessions, but I won't go into it, the principle of just governance, which is in a way related to just growth. So it's just growth, not just growth. I think you need to get that emphasis correct. The goals to be included, we thought there needs to be some goals about redistributive economic policies, targeted employment for marginalized groups. I think the other thing that came up from the discussion was to go beyond good governance to just governance. Yeah, I've just said that. So social justice and collective responsibility and actions. The private sector, and I think Asif said this too, private sector should embrace a triple bottom line approach. I'm completely used to being told off by my staff, so yes, it's 5 minutes, I know. I won't take the rest of the 5 minutes. Create a demand for sustainable goods and services that benefit stakeholders rather than shareholders. We also felt that for there to be equity, their governance should be both a standalone pillar as well as linked with other pillars, and the development agenda as a whole. So and governance should not be just confined to just the state, but non-state actors should also be accountable. There was also an issue about a goal relating to ending discrimination in employment and access to services. and move from transactional to transformational development. Now, some of these things sound more like principles than goals, but it was just because I think we were trying to do this in the midst of doing a number of other things. But I think basically those are the ideas that we want to put forward at the from that session, and which we think came out of it. Instruments of delivery, we have 4, there could be many more, but there's legislation on CSR so that the private sector development activities are aligned with national policies, a little bit like what happened in what is happening in India, maybe not as prescriptive, but in a way that they are aligned. Affirmative action policies, we felt that that is really actually something that is important for equity, both for the public and the private sector, and capacity enhancement for community autonomy. So issues like, one of the issues that came out of was the whole idea to extend land tenure for citizens, how difficulty the people found it in the community forestry groups, and to enhance the capacity of communities to actually demand their entitlements. And of course, the whole, another instrument of creating equity are the social protection policies. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much on that. We are not commenting on the debriefs at this moment. Now I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Ashoka Gunawardena from CEPRI to give us the outcomes of the shared societies and governance session. Sir, the floor is yours.
I'm going to summarize what is there. No, it's okay. Well, I can get the PowerPoint on, but what I will do is to
Karin, the chair has so much of powerful points, he doesn't need a PowerPoint. Why do you?
What I will do is to summarize the bullets that are there into 5 basic points, which constituted the thrust of the discussion that we had in the morning. First, that governance is fundamental in repositioning development in the context of South Asia, that it should ensure that people move towards shared societies. The theme was governance and shared societies, or shared societies and governance. The second point that came out from the discussion was that transferring the model of good governance developed in Western societies is unlikely to be effective in making for inclusivity in South Asia. The third point was that governance is eventually about power relations, relations between state and society, and must lead to change in institutions structuring relations between economic, social, and political spheres. The fourth point that came out from the discussion was that governance interventions take place in a political context, and the political sensitivities are important to the success of governance interventions. And fifth is that governance interventions should focus on building sustainable institutions, but we need to take into account the tendency for politicization of institutions. And I want to add here the value frameworks or the inertia that is in institutions that is likely to lead to a path dependence as far as change is concerned. No, I won't take 5 minutes. Don't worry. Thank you. We noted that good governance is an extremely essential part of effective development. We noted the indivisibility of development, indivisibility of development, not invisibility, indivisibility, political and economic are intrinsic aspects, and we also noted that it is necessary to take into governance interventions must take into account the interdependence between individual and collective dimensions, especially since in South Asia, governance is about poor, marginalized, and excluded. We noted that bad governance impacts negatively on the poor. There are desirable governance elements that should be ends of development, and we noted political freedom as an should be an intrinsic component of social development agenda. That institutions matter for growth but need to be relevant, and the necessity to take a long-term view without compromising immediate needs. Coming to recommendations, what came out strongly was that the concept of shared societies, which provides for inclusivity, which provides for diverse groups to come together, should reach global, should be looked upon as a model of inclusivity and reach global discussions. Especially because it includes respect for diversity, individual dignity, equal opportunity, and protection from discrimination. In the context of South Asia, we noted that it is urgent that governance address eradication of extreme poverty, social marginalization, protecting rights of all social segments, especially the poor, and that institutions for good governance, building institutions for good governance would need to review the capabilities of the state to deliver inclusive governance, including honest, accountable political institutions that allow public participation in decision making, and importantly, bring about non-violent modes of conflict resolution leading to safety, security, and respect of separate identities. In terms of instruments of delivery, I would start with the second, decentralized and more local modes of governance based on the principle of subsidiarity, because human actions are grounded at the local level and move upwards, and the need for a new global economic system. Growth is not adequate to address poverty. In terms of new angles, move down, sorry. Right. In terms of new angles to be included, the question of the question of measuring impact, the specific goals, targets should refer to inclusion of all identity groups, ensure participation of all groups through establishment of consultative bodies, channels of communication, increased accountability, facilitating civic participation in decision making, and setting the structure of incentives that will influence how social political institutions are formed. And in this context, we noted the importance of commitments, of credible commitments on the part of government. I hope that summarizes. I was not the chair, but I must. Yes.
Well, sir, you are sitting in a chair, and you have done extremely good in terms of making it happen, the summary of the session, even not being the chair. And I think that it was a very structured, insightful elaboration of the points, and it will give very good inputs for drawing up the final outcome document. Thank you very much. May I invite now Dr. Vishaka Heldej from the, she is the Regional Director of Practical Action. It's for the session on role of technology in achieving sustainable development. Please.
Okay. I think as all of you all noted, it was a very interesting discussion about science and technology and its role in the post-2015 agenda, and particularly the, yeah, no, we don't, no, we're not. I'm just reading from the paper. Um, the role of science, technology, and innovation in the post-2015 agenda, and we talked a lot about the IPR regime and the bottlenecks and how we can use our diaspora as a vehicle for technology transfer. So I'm not going to go into details, and I'm going to straight go into the recommendations. We found there were two sets of recommendations. One set of recommendation that should be going into the post 2015 discussion at the global level. This is based on the premise that technology transfer is seen as the strategy for accessing resource efficient technologies for developing countries. We say that it's not good enough. It needs to be broader strategies to access science, technology, and innovation by developing countries than just technology transfer. And on the other hand, we are saying that technology transfer is useful, but the IPR regime, the barriers that are posed by IPR regime for developing countries is not going to just go away because of the new development goals. So need to be revisited. But at the same time, it's unlikely that this will happen during these discussions, and by 2015 everything will be sorted out. So as pointed out during the discussion, there are certain flexibilities and concessions that are available to developing countries, particularly to least developing countries, within the IPR regimes to build on that. And yes, I saw. Thanks. Build on that and extend that flexibility during the negotiations to see whether we can come out with some sort of additional flexibility to look at technology needs. Resource efficient technology needs in the sectors that are eventually be identified as to improve performance within those sectors depending on the needs of the countries. So that's the global level, and at the local level, I think it is also very important, as the global level, we felt that local level understanding and negotiations are very important, because the space given for local readiness process can be used as a space to develop a more democratic, inclusive process of science and technology agenda with the engagement of not just the scientists, but also the general public, but it needs to be made, it needs to be understood consciously. Otherwise, it will be just like another policy making process that we do, where finally it doesn't serve anybody. So the local agenda too should be just broader than readiness for technology transfer. It should also be more inclusive of, like at the global level, more inclusive of local knowledge, local innovation, as well as technology transfer. And there was also very strong recommendation on more public funding for research and development, and that should be also part of that local agenda. The instruments, I'm not sure whether these are instruments or what, but we felt that we need to emphasize that, okay, the local readiness assessment can be used as an instrument to identify the local priority. Global agenda. Why I think the importance of this local agenda. And also the MDG, the post 2015 process, recognizing that there is more than just technology transfer, is on the premise that later on, whatever the decisions making, resource mobilization will be only directed towards otherwise technology transfer. If the other components such as local innovation and local traditional technologies plus etc. get included in the agenda, be it at the global, be it at the local, then that will get recognized. Then of course there is about the whole issue of this diaspora was seen as whether it's an instrument or a mechanism. It's certainly a way for us to think about and also to learn from other countries how they have done. And also it was also mentioned that we should negotiate as blocks, not just blocks as South Asia, maybe even bigger blocks as developing countries to leverage some of these concessions we are asking for. And I think towards the end we talked about, not maybe adequately enough, about the open source, users' use of open source techniques, social media involvement, crowdsourcing, whatever you name it, to engage more public involvement in setting the agenda, because science and technology agenda, contrary to what people think, public think, and the scientists think, it is not the agenda of the scientists, it is the public's agenda where science and technology should focus on. So those are the points I have from that session. I hope I covered it adequately.
Yes. Thank you very much for that succinct summary of the session. It's a complicated issue, technology. It has different dimensions, and it was difficult, I'm sure, the discussion and the summarization even more challenging. Thank you very much for that. The final session on the ownership and the instruments. I call upon Dr. Fahmida Khatun from Center for Policy Dialogue, Dhaka, for the summary, please.
Thank you, Chair. The session just concluded, so I wouldn't go into the issues.
And you got time to do a PowerPoint?
No, I only have 2-3 slides. Okay, I'll be very brief. So the guiding principle of the session was to promote acceleration of sustainable growth, which is inclusive, and the discussions during the sessions which were included. The topics or the issues which the discussants felt should be included during the post-2015 agenda is the assessment of effectiveness of financial mechanisms and diversify financial sources, and incorporation of measurable targets in the next set of goals. As we know, because in the MDGs, particularly in MDG 8, there was no quantitative benchmark to be achievable by 2015. Then universal accessibility and just governance processes and mechanisms to be incorporated into the goals or targets, incorporating a goal that covers global collective actions on trade, climate change, and illicit financial flows with concrete quantitative benchmarks, targets, and deadlines. Then the issue to promote separate climate change goal or sustainability goal to which climate change goal is embedded, or targets on climate change, and how to deliver the instruments for delivery. First, engagement and participation of different sections of society, focusing on issues of transparency and accountability of MDGs, data on delivery of progress to be made freely available for oversight. Taxation should be used as a form of finance, for example, progressive tax frameworks. Then mechanism or standards to guarantee transparency and quality of resources from donors. And finally, the use of conditional cash transfers and biometric ID cards to ensure effective disbursement and utilization of funds. This was recommended as an example, how to ensure delivery of instruments in an effective manner. So these were the major suggestions which were made. I'm sure there were many more discussions, but this is just a summary. Thank you.
Thank you. The session has just ended, and yet you have done a summary. That's a good thing. Thank you very much on that. Colleagues, what we will do now is that we are not going to discuss the whole 2 days once all over again. Please, that is totally out of question, one of the guiding principles. The target is to come out with a coherent document at the end of the day. So that is the goal and target in some way. So what we will do now is to open up the floor for 5 to 10 minutes, maximum 15 minutes, if there is enthusiasm, to see whether any critical issue has not been mentioned anywhere, which is very much possible because it is yet to be fully done and etc. And I would, once we hear all this, I will try to give a structure for the final document, because we will need to produce a coherent document of all the things which we have discussed. And that's not an easy thing, because you have seen the growth debate, how it went around. So that itself will show that it is not an easy thing. But, you know, we have the advantage of having the English language, which is quite flexible and is known for its understatement. So we will be able to use the language to capture all those nuances at certain point in time. And those who have dealt with language in terms of producing the international consensus document knows very well how to do that in certain ways. But many of us are here. They will be able to do it. So that we will do at then. And we'll put together a structure as we listen to all of you. So the floor is open. Tell me which one of your hobby horse is not being mentioned. Please. Feel free. Yes, please.
Thank you. One point which perhaps should have come up in the last session, and I would have answered it if we had time to Karen's question, which in my head at the moment is still a bit of a question, which is whether or not when we're making recommendations, particularly for targets and goals, we should be making recommendations about specific kinds of policy measure. In other words, because one or two of the points raised there in terms of recommendations were actually, if you like, recommending that governments, perhaps we're only focusing on South Asian governments here, but governments should adopt particular policies to address their development problems. That to me is potentially inconsistent with one of the other points that was raised, which is about having nationally determined development strategies. So I think there's just a point there when we're thinking about the package of recommendations and the coherence of that package to look out for.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I think at this moment, the whole responsibility moves to the secretariat of the conference, that's to CEPA, to take note of all those things, and then we will come back on that. So it's the chairs are absolved from this responsibility. So it's the secretariat who will take over now. Yes. Anybody else, please? Please.
Hi. Sorry, I've come to this a bit late, so maybe this has been covered already. But listening to today's conversation, I recognise it's a very technical conversation, looking at quite a lot of economics, but looking at other sort of development agenda stuff. And I just wanted to clarify or find out whether or not the issue of culture, had that come up as part of the sustainability mechanism in any sort of discussions over the last 2 days? Because I think that's an interesting and intricate part that hasn't been involved.
Yes, just to address that question, if my memory doesn't fail me, there was a panelist, Taruka. She mentioned about the spiritual dimension, the South Asian values, sometimes the religious, goalposts, all those things, and social contacts, which we do, may be one of our strengths in many ways. Although at a different circumstances, I would disagree with that. But today, I would agree with that, what has been said in that way, so for the brevity of time. But that issue was raised. But would you like to give a concrete target or an indicator for that? How to bring in that cultural thing into the development discourse? This is an important part. But I don't know, as a practicing economist, I don't have any clue how to put it as a target or indicator. I can mention it as a principle or as a concern, as an issue, but I don't see how we really get it reflected, and we don't get into a competitive fight which region of this world has better spiritual and social values than the other.
Thank you. And I, again, wouldn't also be an expert in this area. And the reason why I bring it up is because my organisation works also in the cultural dimension, but it's not my area of work. I'm a development worker also. So I don't have a specific recommendation or a specific policy area which I could recommend. However, there are some very interesting papers out there on specifically this. I believe an organisation called IFICA, now the acronym defeats me now what it means, but they've just come out with a whole, I think, like an 80-page document on how culture can be ingrained and included in the post-2015 process. So yeah.
Thank you. That was interesting. Priyanti, you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think it should become, what you said, an issue or a concern, that we haven't really had time to debate in this forum, because I think it's a double-edged sword culture. I mean, it is positive in the way Taruka mentioned it in the panel, but it is also used sometimes as a sort of regressive force. I mean, if you talk in terms of gender issues and things, I think sometimes culture can be used in a very negative sense.
So all your discriminations and exclusions were based on some of these.
Exactly. So I think we need to, I agree to the point that it can be a strength, but I think it's a issue that we haven't debated, and I would be uncomfortable to put it into the document without actually debating it. So maybe it's something to put for a future
Avinash.
discussion.
Just to continue with this, I think the positive way to represent this could be one, the dimension of traditional knowledge, and second is the social cohesion, which has been talked about.
Yeah.
Oh, the
Thank
sense
you.
of fairness which is around, yes. Anybody else on this issue? This is a very interesting issue, but sun is going down. I want to get to other issues too. So please come, Gopal.
On the trade and
Please come.
on the issue of trade and development, so it's an important part of the, maybe part of the growth, but as a separate.
No, it's part of the growth and also it's part of the instruments. It's in terms of instruments also, both in terms of productive capacity, the supply side, and also market access and non-tariff barriers and many other issues which are associated with that. Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else? Say something which was never discussed. That would be also interesting. Which we didn't, this is a chance to say, which we didn't discuss. So, Nidhi.
Nidhi's got the challenge.
No, I think it might have been discussed and I might have missed it out. But global partnership includes rich countries as well. So how are what are the accountability measures that will be applicable to rich countries? Transparency measures, like for example, global financial systems, transparent global financial systems.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. It comes on the partnership issue, possibly in the last session in some ways, but it can be also in other areas. And when we talked about that, this is all about this implementation mechanism, the monitoring mechanism, the transparency and the accountability process. They're both horizontal and vertical, sorry for the jargons, both the vertical and the horizontal ones, horizontal meaning in our own countries, whereas in the vertical in the global hierarchy as we move from national, regional to global and agencies. It is an important point. And it is not only for the rich countries, but since we have identified South-South as one of the new elements of the future of the global partnership, it includes all of them as well, and also our national governments vis-a-vis the citizens. I think that's an important point, which is we will take note of. Please.
I'm not sure if it's quite relevant, but in the area of sustainable development and health, I think it didn't come up, but one of the issues is that a lot of emphasis in today's world is on the curative, the Western model, whereas I think some of the Asian countries have preventive health systems, and it may be an important area to look into the existing preventive health systems in I know Sri Lanka has a very strong system, and there's not been an emphasis on looking that as an alternative for limited financial resources going into the health sector.
I think that's a very good point, but my concern is, Dr. Bandanayak, is that we are talking about bringing out 10, 12 maximum global goals, within which if health will be definitely one, and within health we already know there are a couple of targets which are prefixed in some way. Infant mortality or child mortality in one, +5 or less 5, and maternal mortality is there. Both of them are there. People are also asking for an indicator related to reproductive rights. So would you also like another one on the, it's already a bit crowded in many ways with some established indicators, but we can make mentions of that in terms of, please, Dr. Kumarasamy.
I mean, non-communicable diseases, I guess, now are becoming more and more difficult. I don't know whether within that framework you can think of.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that please, the Secretary, take note of that on that, because there will be other issues relating to pandemics, HIV, AIDS, and others, so maybe we will have to deal it in certain areas. Anything else? if as a the prerogative of the privilege of being a participant, not as a chair, I want to add an issue which we didn't come up because of time possibly, is relates to the last session. And somebody mentioned, I think Gopa mentioned about the issue of double taxations and others. But what I wanted to mention, which is an agenda which has already matured, it is about the taxation issue, the international taxation agenda. It is coming up not because of the LDCs or the low-income countries. It is coming up because of the large countries, because of tax evasions which are taking place and the disclosures which have been very poor, particularly the European banks. It's the US which is more interested at this moment. We do have the tax haven issues, particularly in the Caribbean and their developing countries. So the taxation agenda is matured. This is one of the new elements which will come into the area of partnership. And related to that is the issue of illicit financial flow from the low-income countries. So illicit financial flow is related to those disclosure and the new banking rules and regulation which we are talking about. Please take note of that. Please put that in. Yes, so Vakise, you want to say something?
Yes, please.
Please
maybe
come up over here.
Maybe this was discussed earlier. Sorry if I missed it. But related to taxing, from a local perspective, would indirect taxes be an indicator? Would it count as an indicator or a target? Because the more indirect taxes you have, it does seem to have a negative effect on the lower segments of the population. So maybe in a way of addressing inequality, would lower indirect taxes be an indicator?
Yes, that's an interesting point. I think there are two measures of, first of all, domestic resource mobilization, tax as a percentage of GDP, which is 11% plus and minus in a low-income country. Whether it will at all become an indicator or not is a very debatable point. Because whether by putting in, while we all now agree, even the developing countries agree that the domestic resource mobilization should be an added point in a strong way beyond ODA, but whether it will be an indicator or not, that is also still not sure because it is being fought. Even within that, people do agree, those who do taxation studies, fiscal studies, they will tell you, there are two structural changes which are considered to be progressive other than the taxation rate. One is when we move away from trade-dependent taxes to domestic activity-dependent taxes. So it is because of liberalization, trade liberalization. And the second one is dependence on more direct taxes than the indirect taxes, particularly on profit and income and capitals. So that is, but I agree with you on that, but whether it can get into it, into one of the 49 or 50, I am not quite fully sure about that, but it is definitely one of the areas. Please take note of it. We can always mention, it's up to them, but we can always mention that. Anything more? Yes, Karin.
I think in the last session, one of the objectives of the session was to really talk about partnerships and different kinds of partnerships and different levels of ownership that different sectors have to play. And we really didn't get a chance to get into it. And so we don't really have...
So what is the suggestion?
That there is some work that we do to try and bring that
so building partnership, building alliances, but there are various forms of partnership at various levels. Which one you are referring to? I will come to Gopal. What were you referring to?
Mainly, one of the issues that came up a little bit was the roles that public-private partnerships can play, and we also have the South-South. And then there was an idea about what happens, especially for the trade technology session. There were issues raised about the who have the technologies and those who don't have the technologies. So it did come up in the sessions, but not in a very cohesive way. And so I feel we need to capture that.
Would you kindly collect them in one place?
Yeah, I think
and
we
also
would like
the
to.
issue also about the partnership among the citizens and their national governments with, or the movements, social movements and others which have been mentioned as well. Please add that. Please consider it has been included. Gopal.
Mainly on this partnership thing, one issue is that one dangers of partnership is the conflict of interest. So there should be some kind of firewalls or needs to be built in, especially when private sector involvement in some of these things in the implementation. So I just want to flag it.
So would you mention one or two firewalls? Is CSR a firewall for you?
Not
full disclosure and good code of conducts for those foreign investors in your country. Is that a good firewall for you? OECD guidelines.
OECD guidelines, there are problems with that.
Your third world networks guidelines? No, so I think please nuance it, with the point which has been made. Please nuance the language with that, please.
I think on partnership and with respect to sustainability, one thing which can be brought in is, though it was not discussed, is public-public partnership, because I think that will be very critical, which we know because of the lack of coherence within the system of government.
When you say public-public, what do you mean? The municipal
Within
bonds?
within the state. Let's say, if I can give you example on sustainability, achieving one MDG will require coherence between 5 ministries or departments. So when we say this, it's lack of coherence, and not only in South Asia, I think it's an international discourse, that lack of coherence within the system, government system.
That's why UN was talking about delivering as one.
Yes.
One UN theory came up from that recognition of the problem. Coordination, coherence within this. Anything more? Dr. Kumar Sir.
On the partnership pillar, regional integration, I mean, I'm having difficulty in thinking of indicators and targets, but at least at the level of principle, in a multipolar world, increasing salience of regional organizations, South Asia, we are way behind. So I'm wondering whether there is some merit, certainly in any submission from South Asia, at least at the level of principle, for Southern civil society voices to really press on the whole principle of regional integration.
Thank you very much. Nidhi.
Quickly,
yes, sun is going down.
Yes, just 1 second. Moving beyond sharing of society and sharing of prosperity. So shared prosperity as a principle, and moving beyond shared society.
Okay, that is part of the principles. We have with us Honorable Kasamutim. Would you like to say something, sir? Emphasize certain points?
Everything has been said.
Can't be so. I was just planning for my next session, and you say everything has been said.
Everything has been said, and anything that could be added to what you have already said would be superfluous. So,
you want to emphasize any certain point from your session or anything what you hear?
I think the gentleman who was on the panel has summarized very well all the different interventions on that session. So I don't have any particular issue to raise at this stage, except perhaps to thank you for the way that you've been leading this final session. Otherwise, the sun would have already been set, and we wouldn't have reached any conclusion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very wise comment. Very wise comment. Now, I can't think of a better way to conclude it in that way. Thank you very much. You have given me the scope now to move and really close it. And thank you very much. Colleagues, we'll close now. We'll close now. It had been an extraordinary 2 days. As I said, that we set out with 4 targets in that way, and we have achieved our goals. And the goals are usually how do you measure the success of an conference? I don't know. In my first time when I was still very young, and at that time somebody told me, if you have gone to a meeting and if you have met half of the participants are your old friends and the other half are the new ones, then that is the success indicator of a conference. I didn't bother about the outcome document at that time. And so I think from that perspective, it was excellent for me, because half of them were my old friends, half of them were new ones. So that is fine. But we will still have to do the outcome documents. Now, my first point on that, what is the UPS, the unique selling point of this particular meeting for the last 2 days? Let me mention 4 of them. What are the unique selling points? The first selling point is that it is one of those rare meetings where the environmental experts and the development experts and the practitioners have come together. Usually we live in silos, as you have all mentioned in that way. So it was, the debates and the discussion will show that we came to a shared objective, will lead to shared prosperity, but we were coming from different vantage points. I think that was also very unique in terms of the, the cross-fertilization of thoughts. The second one is that it was happening in South Asia. South Asia is an unique place, in some way a microcosm of this world. You have an emerging economy, you have the LDCs, you have middle income countries, low, and also have landlocked countries, island countries. So it is a really microcosm of the global transitions or the dynamics which is taking place. The third is the timing of this conference. The timing of the conference is also unique because we are just almost finishing the content development and moving into the negotiation phase globally in the post-2015. So this is some way the last opportunities in the coming months to push in whatever concerns we have in the final way. And the last and not the least is that it strengthens the Southern voice, the deficit which is there in terms of participation capacity, and fulfills a bit of a vacuum or the lacuna in that way. These are the four the unique selling points of this advantage of this meeting. And it was, although Southern in many ways, but it also benefited from the participation from the extra-regional participants. We have from Japan, UK, from Mauritius. If I have missed out somebody, please excuse me. But Germany. So Europe is very much there. And we had from, where are you from, sir?
UK.
UK. Okay. And then we had from, I remember my colleague from SDC over here. So it is not a very much a South Asian ghetto. It is an open platform with bit of an, in a way, cross-fertilization of thoughts in it. Please do mention that in your outcome document as a selling point in that way. On the outcome document, let me propose a structure. The first is, of course, the context. The second are the issues and the concerns, which can be some taken out from the concept note and also from all the things we are saying. The third are the principles which have been mentioned. What the principles we are guided by. Some of them are already accepted globally, some of them are new, but what is important is our emphasis on that. The second are the goals and targets, and if possible indicators. But you can stay with the goals and targets, and as much as possible coherent over here. And I expect it will be more environmentally biased, given CEPA's orientation. I understand all the things we have discussed. That's nothing wrong with that, but you have to have the development dimensions rightly done over there. The fourth point would be the instruments. Instruments starting from ODA to trade, the public-private partnership, all those things will all go over there on that. And the last point would be, the last but one penultimate will be on the monitoring and oversight mechanism. That will be the last but one headline. And final point is the political commitment and the citizens' expectation from our national governments too. So that way. My only two major concerns, or I may say two major worries. One, many of the discussions which have taken place are correct, but they have domain conflict, what I would call a domain conflict, in the sense that some of them relate to the global policymakers, some of them relate to the national policymakers. So please make those clear, because otherwise you will get the slap on your wrist by saying that go back to your government and tell all these things. Why do you come to New York with it? There is some of those things that has to be made clear. So the domain issue has to be clear. The number two is the coherence issue. It has to be coherent. It has been pointed out in some ways. In this and the other, it should not be conflicting. But if the conflict are there, please do recognize that. Please do recognize. There is nothing to shy away from that. My last point is, well, we have a long way to go. We have come some way, but we have a long way to go. And in some cases, I know there will be formal ways of thanking and others, but I would take this opportunity to thank CEPA, because CEPA always takes us back to the core values. I may not always feel comfortable with that, because I may have moved away from it, but because they always go on reminding us about their core values. I really want to thank them for this, that they brought us all together around this one and with a shared objective on that count. So to them and the colleagues, Priyanti, Karin, and many other colleagues who had been there in that way. I'm also grateful to the participants, both from the region and from outside. And they have been also a source of rich knowledge, wisdom and everything. Particularly those who have come from outside the region, they have been particularly helpful. I would also take this opportunity to thank our supporters, because many of them possibly are here, possibly not here, for keeping faith on us as a co-organizer, both as a CPD and also a Southern Voice, of which many are members, including SDPI over here. We are very happy, and Nidhi's institution, the Listed institution, we are all members of the Southern Voice. We had been done there. sometimes the issues which have been raised appear to be beyond reality. But there was a young man whom I used to adore very much in my childhood. He said, "We are the realists, so we dream the impossible." His name was Che Guevara. And then there was another young man who really energized my whole young life. He said that, "Don't feel shy to dream, just have the courage to follow your dream." His name was Walt Disney. Two different persons and two different coming together. Let us imagine the impossible and have the courage to realize that dream. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
I think before we go, I really need to thank Dr. Bhattacharya for this, for support, for bringing all of us together in this, and for initiating the Southern Voice as an initiative that allows us the space and to speak, for collaborating, and for all the guidance he gave us when we were organizing this. Also to, as he mentioned, the partners, the Southern Policy, STPI, Practical Action, the SAPRI, particularly to bring in the insights of two of ex-presidents to this conversation. All the presenters and discussants for their papers, their time, their insights. I think we can't thank you all by name, but I think we really appreciate that you took all the time to spend on providing the input into this 2 days. All of you who have been here and have, as Dr. Bhattacharya said, have contributed to this discussion, airing your fears and your concerns and your positive input. We also have in the background our board of directors and our members. Some of our directors have participated more actively. We have 2 of them in the room today. And the CEPA chair, Dr. Savitri Gunasekara, Professor Savitri Gunasekara, who wasn't being able to be here, for their very active support and encouragement. We couldn't have done this without support from IDRC's TTI initiative and from the Swiss Development Corporation support for this. And also, we want to thank Dialogue and YA TV for the electronic backup. I was very excited to find ourselves live on and I think that also enabled us to get another audience, the people who couldn't be in this room. And as you saw in some of the sessions, we actually had some questions from that audience. So thank you very much. We need to thank the hotel for bearing up with us for 2 days and all the different arrangements that they had to make. I think the chairs will admit that these wonderful presentations we were able to make at the last minute was also due to the fact that we had a team of note takers, ably managed by Roshni, indefatigable editor of CEPA, Roshni Alas, who actually, CEPA staff and other friends, who actually did a really good job, I think, pulling all the session ideas together. So I think we need to really thank them. As other CEPA staff have also contributed to making this event a success. I mean, CEPA works always as a team, so it's too much. We have now too many people to thank. There are about 30 people in CEPA, and they've all pulled their weight towards...
Why don't you ask them to get up?
Do you want them all together?
Yes, so that we can recognize them and give an applause.
Okay,
yes,
all right.
Please, you together.
Yes.
Why not? Well,
No. We are okay. Just thank us for it. But while we are thanking all of CEPA staff, I think there is a particular round of applause is due to the core team, Karen and Vagisha, who drove the content of this program, Feroza and Vanita, who drove the logistics of this program, and of course Roshni and Nadia, who were the documenters. So, thank you very much. You're cordially invited to a reception near the poolside at 6:30. 6:30, no? And we hope to see you there. Thank you again.
Well done.